I'll cast on him my every care and wait, sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, where I find consolation share, till from Mount Bliss of lofty heights I view my home and take my flight. This wall of flesh shall drop and rise to seize the everlasting prize, and shouts while passing through the air. Farewell, sweet hour of
Amen. Well, I'm convicted this morning, and I knew they were going to sing that, but it still had. I'm convicted even more. You say, why are you convicted? Because honestly, I don't know when the last time is. I spent an hour in just fervent prayer. And I don't know, I'm sure there are people here that's a regular practice of yours, and I'm ashamed to say it's not of mine, but it should be. And I can go out and run for 2 hours in the morning time, and I do listen to preaching in my earbuds, and sometimes I'll just enjoy the quiet, and I do pray sometimes whenever I'm running. And I'll wake up in the morning and spend some time praying and studying, and right before I go to bed, I'll pray sometimes. And so prayer is good, and I feel like I do pray. But what about this hour of prayer? I mean, there was a time when that was everybody talked about this sweet hour of prayer. And last week, in fact, I talked about we kind of beat up a little bit on some of the other practices concerning prayer, specifically among other denominations and stuff. And we talked about how Jesus said, you don't need to have these long prayers so that you can be heard, and vain repetition and all this kind of stuff. We talked about that last week. But the truth of the matter is there's nothing wrong with praying long, and we're going to talk about that this morning. There's not even anything wrong with repeating prayers necessarily, and we're gonna see that here in the text. Those things are okay. Jesus was just teaching. In fact, he showed in his own life that these are okay. He was just teaching that publicly you shouldn't go on this really long prayer so people could hear how spiritual you are, and they can see you and think, wow, this is a good guy, and oh, God's going to have favor on me because I can pray for a long time. It's that attitude, and it's that and all that's wrong. So we continue our series in Lord, Teach Us to Pray. It's fitting that we close a series. This is the last of the series before we start in the book of John. Next week is VBS Sunday, so we're doing things a little bit differently. But after that, we're going to start a series from the book of John called Believe, and I'm looking forward to that. But we're going to close this series out, Lord, Teach Us to Pray. We're going to look at Jesus in the garden, and we're going to ask these questions. Why and how do we tarry in prayer? Why and how to tarry in prayer is the title of the sermon. So turn to Matthew chapter 26, if you would. I used this text in teaching the children this morning, and I asked, how many of you watch movies that are 2 hours long. Maybe you've even watched a movie that's 3 hours long. There's some movies out there that are super long, and they all agreed they watch movies regularly, 2 hours long, whatever. I said, if you watched a movie that was an hour long, you'd probably say that was a short movie. And they agreed with me there. And I said, well, what if I asked you to pray for an hour? All of a sudden, that'd be a long hour. About 5 minutes, I've ran out of things to pray for. I don't know what else to pray about. And so I think it's fitting that we look at this morning. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 26. Now, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, each gospel shares this story to some degree or another. Some of them give us other details. We're familiar with the story of Jesus in the garden and praying and sweat came down as it were great drops of blood, and we're familiar with all these. What's hard is piecing them together through the different accounts. I love the four Gospels. It gives us like a three-dimensional view or four-dimensional view of the stories as they're told, because we can get little bits and pieces from each author, human author there. But so this story is kind of hard. So I'm going to just read from Matthew, but as I might insert a few things here or there from the other gospel accounts that aren't recorded in Matthew. But Matthew 26, starting in verse 31. Then said Jesus unto them, all ye shall be offended because of me this night. For it is written, I will smite the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock shall be scattered abroad. But after I am risen again, I will go before you into Galilee. Peter answered and said unto him, though all men shall be offended because of thee, yet will I never be offended. Jesus said unto him, verily I say unto thee, that this night before the cock crow, thou shalt deny me thrice. Peter said unto him, though I should die with thee, yet will I not deny thee. Likewise, also said all the disciples. Then cometh Jesus with them unto a place called Gethsemane, and I believe that means oil press, which is kind of interesting. I probably won't mention that again. And said unto the disciples, sit ye here while I go and pray yonder. And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. Now, as you compare all of these different gospel accounts, what happened was Jesus has a larger amount of disciples that are with him, and he sets them there, and he takes the three that he always takes, Peter, James, John. And they go with him a little bit further into the garden. I don't know what the significance of this is. And he has them sit there and pray, watch and pray. And then Jesus goes yet a little bit farther, falls on his face and begins to pray is what's going on here. So can someone tell me where I left off? And took him to him, Peter, two sons of Zebedee, Peter, James, and John, and began to be sorrowful and very heavy. 38, then saith he unto them, my soul is exceeding sorrowful, even unto death. Tarry ye here and watch with me. And he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Now we keep making reference to what we call the Lord's Prayer or the Lord's model prayer. And he practices what he's preaching because he is saying the exact same thing. Thy will be done, okay? That's the most important thing. He says, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Now, he knew somewhat of what he's getting ready to experience, maybe not all the details, but he had an idea, and he said, nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. And he cometh unto his disciples, and findeth them asleep, and said unto Peter, what, could ye not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. He went away again the second time and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. And he left them and went away again and prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then cometh he to his disciples. Now, there you see there again, that's repetition. He's gone 3 times now, and he's pretty much prayed the same thing. But here's what I kind of think, because we're talking about an hour worth of praying here. I kind of get the idea that that's all the disciples heard. He started his prayer off by saying, if it's possible, take this away from me, but thy will be done. I know I have to drink this cup. And then the disciples, and so that's all they heard. So that's all that's recorded. And then goes back again and says the same thing. Obviously, he prayed a lot more, but this was what was significant on his mind. Lord, if thy will be done, but he really needed strength during this time. And verse 43, let's see, he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy, and he left them and went away again. Prayed the third time, saying the same words. Then cometh he to his disciples, saith unto them, Sleep on now and take your rest. Behold, the hour is at hand, and the Son of Man is betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us be going. Behold, he is at hand that doth betray me. I think I'm just going to stop right there for now. The rest of the story isn't necessary to what we're teaching tonight, this morning. So here's the thing. Long prayer. Now, we don't want to pray long just to have a long prayer necessarily and be vain in it. That's what Jesus was teaching. We don't want to just have long prayers to be seen of men or whatever. So that's not what we're talking about. But let's be honest, why is it that it's so hard for us to pray for long periods of time? I mean, maybe not everybody, but for me it most certainly is. I'll often... I'll tell Valerie a lot of times before I go to bed. Now, I'm getting ready to go to sleep, but I'm going to pray first. I'll probably fall asleep before I'm done praying. So good night, love you, see you tomorrow. And sure enough, 2 minutes into my prayer. Now, I don't think that's 100% bad, because you're going to sleep. Last thing on your mind, you're having a conversation with the Father. I kind of feel like Jesus right here. He's like, go ahead and get your rest, my son, And but there's not necessarily wrong to do that. But if every time you sit down to have prayer, you're falling asleep, something might be wrong. But that's what we do. So why are some reasons that we have a hard time praying? Because we're too tired, and how about this? Just too comfortable. I should know if I'm laying down in a nice, comfy bed and I'm saying I'm going to go say my prayers, but I'm nice, comfortable, I'm tired. I know good and well I'm going to fall asleep, right? So that's one of the things. Sometimes it's this: we're too uncomfortable. There was a time where I was practicing. I was trying to get familiar with what I called it, working on my spiritual muscles. I was like, all right, if I can go out there and train for running, and I can train with weights and all that stuff, I can train to learn how to pray for a long period of time. So I'd have my little prayer list and all this kind of stuff, and I'm like, I'm going to get these calluses on my knees. I'm just going to spend a long time. But after a while, you hurt so bad, and your legs fall asleep and everything. The next time it's time to pray, you're like, well, I don't really want to suffer that way again. I think I'll just lay in bed. And then you fall asleep, right? So sometimes we don't want to do it because we can't do it because we're just too tired, fall asleep, too comfortable. Sometimes we don't want to do it because it's too uncomfortable. Sometimes it's this, we don't know exactly how to pray for that long. If 2-3 minutes, you run out of things to say. I've already named all my family members, and I don't know what to say. First prayer I was ever taught. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. It didn't mean anything. I just quoted it because that was what I was told. But then after that was the real prayer. God, please bless Mommy and Daddy and my sister and Grandma. And I start mentioning, till I'm done. Amen. And so and if I was really feeling up to it, that prayer might go a little bit longer or whatever. That's how I prayed. Sometimes we don't know what to say, so we just run out of things and we stop praying. Sometimes we just don't. This is it. This is the key. This is what we're going to get to here in a minute. Sometimes we just don't feel the urgency. Nothing's going wrong in our life that bad, that severe. So we don't feel this urgency to pray. We don't know of any situation that will cause us to lose sleep at night or to not want to eat and to lose our appetite or whatever. We don't know that. And so there's no urgency for prayer, or we're just not used to it. We've never made it a routine, worked at it, and tried to be able to pray for long periods of time. Now, might sound like a weird topic for this morning. But as we look at our text, I want to bring out a few things. And at the very end of the message, just a few tips to kind of help us. And I want to challenge everybody. Like I said, I'm convicted, and I'm going to make a personal challenge to start building up to a regular prayer time that's at least an hour long. And you say, well, are you just wanting to, impress people or what? No, nobody will ever know if I do it or not do it. But it's a challenge for myself, and I want to also extend that challenge to you if you don't already have such a sweet hour of prayer like the song talked about it. I think it would be fitting for us all to work on that, okay? But before we get to that point, let's look at this. Here are some reasons the disciples couldn't tarry in prayer. Why did they keep falling asleep? Well, Luke says this, and look at Luke chapter 22. Matthew, Mark, Luke 22 tells the same story. And verse 45, this is the only place where we see this. Luke gives some details that the other Gospels don't give because he was a physician. And so he thought of things that you and I might not typically think about, but he had that kind of a mind where he thought about these things. But this is kind of interesting. Luke 22:45 says this. And when he rose up from prayer and was come to his disciples, he found them sleeping for sorrow. You can go back to Matthew 26 now. Sleeping for sorrow. Now, best I can understand that, and I looked at a couple other commentaries to make sure that meant what I thought it meant, but basically this is what I get from it. When you experience a lot of sorrow, that can actually wear you out. That can make you tired. You could have a problem in your life. You've been crying about it all day. Haven't taken it to the Lord yet, but you've been crying about it. You've been sorrowful. You just don't know what you're going to do. And that's done wore you out. Now it's time to take it to the Lord, and you're like, I'm just so tired. I just want to sleep. And so you get the body. And that's okay. Your body needs rest. I understand. But you just wear yourself out with worry and sorrow and stress. And then you're tired, and then when it comes to talk to the Lord, you're like, well, I've already exhausted myself. I've already used up all my, all my energy on worrying and sorrowing, and then you're tired, okay? That's what's wrong with the disciples. They had a long day. They had been with the Lord, and he had been sorrowful. They're sorrowful with him. Not sorrowful, but he had been dreading what's coming up and worried about it, trying to give them their last-minute words of advice for them and all. So anyway, Luke tells us that they were tired of sorrow. Secondly, this is why they didn't tarry in prayer. They didn't understand the gravity of what was about to happen. They knew something was coming. They knew Jesus kept saying he was going to leave them. And they kept saying, no, we're not going to forsake you. What are you talking about? Somebody's going to deceive. Somebody's going to betray you. Who? Is it me? I would never betray you. And they're all saying this. They've had an interesting day going back and forth about these kinds of things. And now they're here. But they really don't know what's about to happen. And Jesus wasn't completely clear in telling them what was going to happen, but they really didn't know. And sometimes you and I, we'll experience a situation. We know something's coming, but we really don't know. It's just kind of like I'm just gonna draw straws. I'm just gonna whatever happens, happens. And that's easy to say when you don't know what's going to happen. It's usually after it happens that we start praying. But sometimes we won't go to the Lord in long times of prayer, no fasting and what have you, because we just don't realize the necessity. We don't know the gravity about what's going to happen, or we don't know how it's going to affect us. But here are the reasons that Jesus could tarry and did tarry in prayer. And by the way, this wasn't the first time that we see this. You remember before Jesus was tempted of the devil, he went this period of time of fasting, 40 days without food. And you see him just his whole life, it seems, that we see recorded in the Bible, it seems to be one of prayer. He'd get away after a long time. Here he is, the flocks of people have come to him. He's been given of himself. Virtue's coming out of him, the Bible says. He's wore out. He's healing people. He's feeding the 5,000. He's doing all this. He's preaching. And he's just tired. And you think, man, he probably wants to go home and get some sleep. Nope. He goes up into a mountain, into the wilderness, it says, with the animals. And he gets down and just prays to the Father for long periods of time because he needs his strength more than he needs sleep. He needs the strength of the Lord more than he needs food. And that's what the fasting is, by the way. That's the main reason we fast. We says, Lord, I need you more than I need food. And so you go to the Lord and you pray. And so Jesus, this was not unusual for him because he recognized some things. First of all, Jesus could tarry in prayer because he was terrified of the reality of what was going to happen. Now, I don't know to what extent Jesus in his human body knew what was going to happen. There was obviously some things that were a mystery to him, but there were a lot of things he did know, and we can read that from the text and from other places where he kept telling the disciples things that were going to happen that hadn't happened yet. Jesus knew that he was going to be betrayed by Judas. He even knew it was Judas. If you read, compare all the texts together, he knew he was going to be betrayed. He knew that was going to hurt. It's hurtful to be betrayed. It's hurtful when someone you love turns on you. And he knew he was going to have to suffer that. He knew his disciples were going to be attacked by Satan. That's why he says over and over, for them to watch and to pray. He knew they were going to be attacked by Satan and that ye enter not into temptation, he told them to pray about. He knew he was going to be forsaken. I don't know to what degree, but I think this is what was the most troublesome thing about Jesus that none of us can experience. We can experience pain. Jesus experienced pain. We can experience hunger. Jesus experienced hunger. There's a lot of things that Jesus can relate to, or we can relate to, that Jesus, when he was a man on this earth, he felt those things. One thing we can never relate to is this. Jesus was sinless. He was perfect. He was God. And yet he was going to have to be forsaken, treated as a criminal, have become sin for us, the Bible says. Take sin upon himself, who knew no sin, the Bible says, and be forsaken by God the Father. In his human body, to be forsaken by the Father. And that's something we can't understand, the gravity of what that was going to be like. To some degree, I think Jesus knew that was going to happen. And that was very troublesome for him. He knew that he was going to suffer beyond comprehension. I mean, you could read Isaiah. Even if he didn't already know, he could have just read Isaiah and said, I'm going to have to suffer some pretty severe things just by reading the book of Isaiah. He knew he was going to have to suffer beyond comprehension. He probably knew he was going to, like I said, somehow become sin for us. I don't know if he understood to what degree that would affect him, but he knew all these things. He even knew, because he said many times in the gospel that he was going to rise from the dead. Now, of all the things, I might think that's kind of neat. And if you knew that you were going to be raised from the dead, you might think, well, that's going to be interesting. But you'd be scared to death still, thinking I'm going to die. And then I'm going to raise back to, I mean, think about when you go into a surgery and you're going to be put to sleep or something like that, or open heart surgery, and you're like, I might not come back from this. It's scary. And so Jesus knew these things to some degree. You better believe when you're going through those types of things and you know those types of things are going to happen, you're not so concerned about eating. You're not so concerned about sleeping. You're not so concerned about these kind of things because you are grieved and you want to pray to the Father and get strength. He was genuinely concerned for all those involved. He wasn't just thinking about himself, but he's thinking, whenever I go, all these things are going to happen. Look at Matthew chapter 26, verse 41. He said, watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. He says, you guys don't even realize how weak you are. And you don't even realize what you're up against. Satan is going to battle you. He's going to tempt you. And you need to watch and pray that you enter not into temptation. He also knew that Satan desired to have Peter. Look at Luke again. Luke 22 and verse 31. And the Lord said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired to have you, that he may sift you as wheat. And he keeps trying to warn Peter of this. And Peter, instead of saying, oh, help me, I need the power of the Lord. I need strength to fight the wiles of the devil. In fact, instead, Peter keeps saying, no, Lord, I'll never forsake you. No, Lord, I'll be there to the end. No, Lord. And he keeps saying, Peter, before the cock crows, you're going to deny me thrice. Peter, you don't understand. You are going to just give up. You're just going to be so oppressed by Satan that you're not going to want to continue on. You remember Satan? And all that comes to pass. You remember what happens after Jesus is crucified and he's buried, and Peter says, I go a-fishing. He's like he's given up on all those things that Jesus had told him to do and to continue on after he was gone and all this. Satan had sifted him out as wheat. Jesus knew that these things were going to happen, and he was concerned. Maybe part of the reason we struggle sometimes praying whenever we're okay with ourselves, everything in our life's okay, we don't think about the needs of others. If I'm honest with you, I think about Brother Sheldon a lot here lately and Miss Ruth, and felt kind of guilty. If I'm out going for a run or out to eat with the family, and I'm thinking, what am I doing enjoying myself right now? You ever feel like that? I think women, I gotta be careful how I say it. I think women love their children more than men do. You say, no, what are you talking about? Well, as far as the action of love, showing their love, because if a kid is sick and he's not sleeping, mama don't sleep. Dad's sleeping. I'm like, all right, well, have a good night. I'm going to bed. Mom's up with the kid, changing cold rags on their forehead, checking their temperature, making sure they're okay, and tucking them in. And every time they hear a cough, let me go make sure they're okay. And again, it's not that the dad doesn't love the kids. It's just that's the mom showing her love for her kids. And I think sometimes I just feel guilty. When Valerie is in pain, and she can't sleep because she's in pain. We won't get into her little incident here recently and why she couldn't sleep because of finger pain, but most of you know. The other night, she couldn't sleep because it was hurting her so bad, and I felt guilty sitting in there sleeping while she's on the couch not being able to sleep. I still slept, but I'm just saying, I feel guilty. And when somebody's in the hospital suffering, somebody is just diagnosed with cancer, and man, the road ahead is going to be rough. We want the Lord's will to be done. We're hoping to see things get cured and fixed and Brother Sheldon be healed and all that kind of stuff. But it ain't going to be easy. There's probably going to be some sickness involved, some pain involved, some sorrow and all that. And if we just realize that and we realize the gravity and we cared enough about that, that might inspire us to pray a little harder and to spend a little extra time on our knees. Jesus knew that his disciples were going to go through all these things, and I think that worried him almost as much as what was going to happen to him. You notice in his prayer, he kept saying, I made reference earlier to how that was in his model prayer that he gave to us about thy will be done. And you notice here that that's the prayer he keeps going back to is thy will be done. Thy will be done. Now, one of the things that should keep us awake, if you would, should keep us tarrying in prayer is the fact that we want God's will to be done. Now, the problem is a lot of times it's not so much we want God's will to be done, we just want our own needs met. And so we pray, God, give me this, God, do this for me, God, heal this for me. But we don't really pray, Lord, God, I don't want to do the wrong thing here. Just because my flesh is weak or whatever, I don't want to do the wrong thing. Please help me know. Give me wisdom and all that. Now, you say, well, how do we know? How do we know God's going to, if we're going against His will or whatever? Well, here's a kind of a rule of thumb. If your heart is such that you're praying, Lord, please show me your will. Please let your will be done. I want your will. I really don't want my will. Guess what? He's going to make sure His will gets done in your life because you have that kind of heart, And I think of as many examples in the Bible. People came to the Lord praying for His will to be done. Moses, Abraham, we've mentioned some of those already, where they didn't get things exactly like they wanted to, but God's will was done, and they were content with that. Okay, and so if we will pray according to that, Lord, help me to do the right thing. We want your will to be done. It might be hard for me to accept the results, but give me the attitude and the spirit that says, I want your will. Okay, here's the conclusion. All right, here's the bottom line. There are times in our life, if any of us have not had such times in our life, they're coming, all right? There are going to be times in our life where we're forced to pray fervently, and we're forced to tarry in prayer. We're forced maybe to miss a meal because we don't want to eat because we're so concerned about something going on. We might not sleep at night because there's times in our life that if they haven't already hit you, which probably everyone's had those times, they're coming, all right? And so there will be times where we're forced to pray like we've never prayed before. The situation's severe, when we're terrified about what's about to happen, when we're afraid we want to do what God's will is and want to be able to handle what God's will is, all these things that we mentioned. But the bottom line is that we don't have to wait till those times to tarry in prayer. We don't have to wait till those times come to decide, okay, I better start working on my prayer life. So here's just a few tips, real simple, but they're worth mentioning and worth repeating. Here's a few things that we can do. And like I said, I want to challenge everybody to work on that if it's not already a part of your life. I know I'm going to make some concentrated efforts in my life of doing that. And you say, well, there's no way I could sit down and pray for a whole hour. I'm going to give you a couple tips that might help. But besides that, the main thing is going to be just trying. Just try to spend more time. Daniel, it was kind of the custom of the Jews, and we see that with Daniel. We even see that with the disciples and Jesus Himself, where they had hours of prayer, certain hours of prayer. They'd pray at the 3rd hour, 6th hour, 9th hour, maybe it was, which is basically breakfast, lunch, and dinner times where they would come to the Lord. I'm not saying each time was a whole hour of prayer, but during those hours. And so there might be times in our life where we just mark off, hey, around this time is going to be my prayer time. I'm going to maybe skip a meal or whatever and have prayer time here. Here's a few tips, okay? Number one, avoid getting too comfortable, all right? Probably laying down in bed is not a good time to work on your hour-long prayer time. So avoid getting too comfortable when you pray. But along with that, don't get so uncomfortable, like I said, that you're not going to want to, don't wear your knees out to where your legs fall asleep and you're in so much pain that you can't pray. So you want to be comfortable enough to enjoy the experience and focus on what you're praying for, but not so comfortable that that you fall asleep. Okay, so don't get too comfortable, but don't get too uncomfortable. Number two is this, and I really think that this is a good suggestion. If you don't already do this, our prayer lists are great. We give little prayer sheets on Wednesdays. We try to keep it updated. That's great. But I would recommend that we keep our own prayer log, all right? Take those prayer lists and compare it to your list at home that you have. Just get you a notebook or something and start making a list, and then check off whenever things change. If you're constantly going through that list and constantly marking off, what's been answered or whatever, you are not going to believe. And I've experienced this in my own life. I remember the one time at Southwest, we're talking about a congregation of about 2,000 people, and I thought I'm never going to get to know these people. Like I couldn't remember names or anything. I didn't know what was going on. And I remember one Wednesday I had the day off or something, I don't remember, and I said, I'm going to go through the directory They had kind of those phone book, you had pictures and names and all that. I'm going to go through that, and I'm just going to pray for just as many people as I can pray for, and look at the prayer list and kind of compare some of their names and everything. I don't know how long I spent doing that, but that Wednesday night I went to church, and I can't tell you what kind of experience I had at church that night. It's like I knew everybody. And I walked up to somebody, hey, how's your leg doing? Hey, how's your... Whoa, it was just it was an eye-opening experience. If I actually pray for people, I'll actually love them more. Does that make sense? So keep a log. Now, I personally believe that the Apostle Paul did this, because you read all of his letters and he'll say, I mention you daily in prayer. And he said, I cease not to pray for you. And sometimes I cease not to pray for you, weeping, and there's just too many people. I can't imagine that. I mean, maybe he just had that kind of a mind, but I think he wrote it all down. He made this little list. You might start with your family members or whatever, but don't just stop there. All your church family members, and I wish we had a little directory of some sort. Valerie and I once talked about making, how missionaries have their prayer cards. Well, every family should just have their own little prayer card, like this is your ministry in the church, and this is what you do. I think that'd be a neat idea. But some kind of directory where you can actually do that. Make you a list. Don't forget to come back to that regularly and update it and find out. And when you go to church and you see those people next time, you say, well, what's the latest on this? Now, don't be burdensome on them. I've learned this lesson the hard way, that sometimes people don't want you to ask them about their business all the time, They ask you to pray, and you can just kind of read between the lines and make sure they're okay. But there's sometimes people are like, I'm tired of answering this question. Quit asking me if I'm okay and all this. And so there's a fine line to go there. But keep informed by keeping a list of some sort. I think would be a great way to start. And then just finally, I know this sounds so simple, but practice. Anything in life that you're going to get good at, you got to practice it. Now, most of us have been Christians long enough that we should be far past probably what we are in our prayer life, in our Bible reading. If we had been working on it our whole life, all right. I read about this. Of course, everyone knows I like running. I mean, I'm not a runner. I'm like more of a really slow jogger. But I like that. I'm interested in it. And I just read about this guy, set a record. I actually ran in one race. He was there. He was way ahead of me, but he was there. He set a record about running across the United States in the fastest time. It took him like 45 days of running every day to run across the United States. And so that wasn't enough for him. Now he's going from the coast of Florida all the way up to the coast of Alaska and trying to set the Guinness Book of World Records for the fastest time. Now, I'm not getting into all that kind of stuff, but how did he ever get to that point where he could run 50 miles a day for 40 days? Well, genetics is good. I mean, they say if you want to be a good runner, you got to pick your parents well. All right, you got to pick you can't do that, by the way. But if you have good genes, that's going to help. But I guarantee you, it's not just that he's so strong and he's got such good genetics and all that kind of stuff. Somewhere in his life, he decided, I'm going to get devoted to this, and I'm going to practice every day, and I'm going to strengthen myself, and I'm going to learn some tips, and I'm going to get better each day. That's how you're going to get good at it. Now, I'm going to preface all that with this in mind. We don't want our prayers to be in vain. All right, we preached on that last week. We don't want vain repetition. We don't want to pray just to pray, or make it long just to be long and say that we did it. Especially don't want to do it so that we can be seen by men and they be like, oh, look at him. He prays for an hour every day, or anything like that. That's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about really wanting to establish this time in a habit even of going to the Lord in prayer. Now, everybody knows this. Bad habits are easy to pick up, hard to drop, all right? You don't have to, somebody talks you into smoking one time, now you're addicted, all right? That's an easy habit to pick up. Good habits are hard to start and easy to drop. Does that make sense? All right? So if I wanted to say, hey, exercise is good, so I want to go running every day. If all I have to do is go a couple weeks without running, and all of a sudden I don't want to run anymore, all right? That's not an example that fits everybody here, but I'm just saying, if you want to establish a good habit, it's going to take hard work. And it's only going to take just a couple days of not doing it to just forget about it. Bad habits, easy to pick up, hard to drop. Good habits, hard to pick up, easy to drop. That's just how it goes. So if you're going to make an effort to becoming a prayer warrior, if you will, and to having establishing this time of prayer, it's going to take work and it's going to take practice, all right? The words to the song that Valerie and Sheree sang. The first verse says this: sweet hour of prayer that calls me from a world of care and bids me at my Father's throne, makes all my wants and wishes known. In seasons of distress and grief, my soul has often found relief and oft escaped the tempter's snare by thy return, sweet hour of prayer. If you say, well, I'm just not making any headway on fighting the tempter, maybe you don't have much of a prayer life. I just don't know how to deal with distress and grief. I'm just always troubled. Maybe you haven't established a good prayer life. All these things, I believe the Lord wants to work out for us, but we need to spend time with Him. We need to come to Him as our Father and ask Him for these things. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Lord, we love You, and there's so much, Lord, that we don't do and we don't even try. We might not be faithful in our Bible reading or faithful in our prayer or even faithful in our church attendance, Lord, or there's just different things for one reason or another that we lack at, Lord. Help